The Harry Potter trading card game is a multiplayer collectible card game that can be played competitively or casually one-on-one. This video will go over the rules of a typical game of the HP TCG, and after it you should have enough information to play a regular game. In the Harry Potter TCG, you, represented by a starting character card, are dueling your opponent who is also represented by their starting character card. The cards that you play will include lessons, spells, magical creatures, items, matches, locations, adventures, and even additional characters that will help you in your duel. Over time, the cards that you play will damage your opponent, and every point of damage dealt discards a card from the top of your opponent's deck. You win the game as soon as your opponent's deck runs out of cards. Both players start by shuffling their decks and randomly determining a first player. Each player starts the game with their starting character card on the table, or as it's more commonly known, in play. Your starting character card represents you in the game, and thus will remain in play at all times and cannot be discarded. Each character card has a type line with keywords that certain cards may reference, and a special ability that you can use, but these will be covered in detail later. Before the start of the game, each player draws 7 cards. After each player has their opening hand of cards, the first player's turn begins. Players take turns going clockwise from the first player, and each player's turn is divided into 5 steps. The first and last step, before your turn and end of your turn, are for specific cards that reference these steps. If there are no cards in play that reference these, you can pass through these steps with nothing happening. It is important to note that the before your turn step is still a part of your turn. During the second step of your turn, you draw 1 card, even if it is the first turn of the game. On the third step, your creatures in play will deal damage to your opponent. We will go over this step in detail later. The fourth step, the action step, is the main step of the turn where most of your decisions will take place. At the very beginning of your turn, you are granted 2 actions, and during the action step you may use them to do any of the actions listed in any order or none at all. Let's go over each of these actions individually. One of the actions that you can use during the action step is drawing 1 card. To do this, spend 1 action and put a card from the top of your deck into your hand of cards. Players do not have a maximum hand size, but remember that once a player's deck runs out of cards, they lose the game. To take the play a lesson card action, take a lesson card from your hand and put it into play on the table. Lessons are identified by lesson being found on its type line along the bottom. Playing a lesson takes 1 action during the action step, and lessons stay on the table or in play after you play them. Lessons only have 1 attribute, their type, written on the top and its icon on the art in the middle. There are 5 different types of lessons, and each gives its own power to play other cards. For example, Transfiguration lessons may be used to play Transfiguration cards. Generally, you will want to play lessons as often as you can, as they are the primary way to play your other cards. Creatures, like most other cards in the Harry Potter TCG, have a power cost to play. The power cost is shown in the top left corner of cards. The number is the minimum number of lessons that you need to have in play, and the icon behind the number means that at least one of your lessons must match that type. Creatures also have a type line with keywords that certain cards may refer to. Most creatures also have a box with values with the amount of health they have and the amount of damage each turn that they deal. Certain creatures also have additional abilities, and sometimes the abilities will list extra things that you must do to play the creature, so always read the text before playing. Playing a creature uses 1 action during the action step, and after playing, the card remains in play. Here's an example of playing a creature. In a previous turn, Harry played a Charms and a Care of Magical Creature lesson, and this turn would like to play a Forest Troll. He checks that he has lessons at least equal to the required power cost. He also sees that he indeed has 1 lesson matching the lesson type of the Forest Troll. So, during his action step, he announces that he will be using one of his 2 granted actions for the turn to play a Forest Troll from hand. Forest Troll's ability reads that to play it, you need to discard one of your Care of Magical Creature lessons from play. So as he plays the card, he discards the in-play required lesson from play, putting it in his discard pile. The Forest Troll is now in play. Harry no longer has any Care of Magical Creature lessons in play, but since the cost to play the card is a one-time check, he doesn't have anything to worry about, unless of course he wants to play another creature in the future. Creatures damage your opponent during Step 3 of your turn. Creature damage. During Step 3, all of your creatures in play deal damage to the opponent equal to the number on their card. As mentioned before, dealing damage to an opponent means they have to discard that many cards off of the top of their deck into their discard pile. Remember that whenever a player runs out of cards in their deck, they lose the game. Because the creature damage step happens before the action step in your turn, creatures generally cannot deal damage on the turn that they are played, and you will need to wait until your next turn for them to deal damage to your opponent. For example, Harry has 2 Forest Trolls and a Curious Raven in play. When his turn starts, he goes through his first 2 steps as normal, passing through the first step and drawing a card for the second step. On Harry's third step, Creature Damage, Harry counts up the damage that all of his creatures in play will deal. The Forest Trolls deal 2 damage each, and the Curious Raven deals 1, for a grand total of 5 damage. Harry's opponent discards the top 5 cards of their deck into their discard pile, and afterwards the creature damage step is over. Harry now proceeds to his action step as normal. If one of your creatures takes damage equal to or greater than its health, it is discarded from play, meaning you move it from play into your discard pile. If a creature takes less damage than its health, you will need to track its remaining health with counters or dice. In the Harry Potter TCG, creatures are one of the main ways to deal damage to your opponent. And even though your creatures can't attack the opponent's creatures directly, there are many different types of cards that can deal with them instead. Spell cards can be identified by their type line and by their portrait orientation. Like creatures, spells require 1 action during the action step to play, and you must have the required power cost in the top left corner of the card, meaning having at least that many lessons in play and at least one of them matching the icon. Unlike creature cards, however, after the effect of the spell happens, it goes immediately into the discard pile. As noted, spell cards are in portrait orientation, and this helps you remember that they go immediately into the discard pile when played. All other cards besides spells are in landscape orientation, denoting that they stay in play, unless they are discarded by a card's effect. For example, Harry would like to play Magical Mishap this turn. In a previous turn, he played the Charms and Care for Magical Creatures lessons. He checks the card's power cost and sees that he both has the required minimum number of lessons in play, and at least one of them matches the icon on the power cost. During his turn's action step, he spends 1 action to play the spell card. The effect of Magical Mishap reads, do 3 damage to your opponent. Remember that when anything damages your opponent, it means your opponent discards that many cards from the top of their deck. So when Harry plays this card, his opponent discards 3 cards from the top of their deck, and then Harry discards Magical Mishap. As a reminder, if a spell or anything damages a creature and the damage is bigger or equal to its health, then the creature is discarded. And if less, then track the creature's remaining health with counters or dice. Item cards are similar to creature cards in a couple of ways. They cost 1 action to play and they remain in play after being played. Their keywords are also listed underneath the art, and certain cards may refer to these keywords. Some items provide extra power, noted by extra icons printed next to the word provides. The icons refer to the lesson type, and the number of icons is the number of power of that type that it provides. For example, if an item card provides 1 Quidditch icon, you can think of it as providing the same power that a Quidditch lesson would. However, keep in mind that power provided this way does not count towards lesson amounts, for cards like Incendio. Sometimes cards may offer spending an action to do an effect described on the card. Remember that you are granted 2 actions to use during step 4 of your turn. So if you wish, you may play a card and spend another action to use an effect on the same card. For example, Harry would like to play A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration and then use its effect this turn. For his first action during the action step, he checks that he meets the power cost for the item and then plays it. For his second action, he announces that he is using the action for the item's effect. As per what is written on the item, he discards the item and draws 3 cards. Match cards represent a Quidditch game that you and your opponent play. They require an action to play and are played similarly to creature and item cards through their power cost in the top left corner. Like creatures and items, they remain in play after playing. Only one match card can be in play at a time, so if any player has a match card in play, nobody can play another one, not even the player who controls the existing match. A match card has two parts: to win and the prize. The to win section describes what a player needs to do to win the match. Both players may meet the condition listed, and, unless stated, can accomplish it over multiple turns, so players will need to track their progress. When a player wins the match by meeting the condition described in the to win section of the card, they get the prize in the second half of the match card. Then the player who played the match card puts it into their discard pile. Remember that only one match card can be in play at a time between both players, and that neither player can play another until the current match is completed. Location cards represent the place where the duel is happening. Like every other type of card we've discussed so far, locations require one action to play, have a power cost in the top left corner, and remain in play after playing. They also have an effect that is active while it remains in play. Like match cards, there can only be one location in play at a time between both players. However, unlike match cards, any player may play another location card to replace the current one. If that happens, the player who played the previous location card puts it into their discard pile, and then the effect of the new location becomes active while it remains in play. You can play adventure cards to give your opponent a challenge to overcome. Adventure cards are different to the other cards that remain in play because they have no printed power cost on them. Instead of paying a power cost, you have to spend 2 actions during your turn to play them. This means that on a regular turn, you will need to spend your entire action step to play an adventure card. Each player may only have one adventure card in play at a time, and if you have an adventure in play already, you cannot play another one to replace it. Adventure cards have 3 parts to them: the effect, to solve, and opponent's reward. Some adventures might have an additional cost or requirement to play, which is specified before the effect. The effect is what the adventure does as long as it is in play. Usually, it's a negative effect for your opponent. The to solve portion describes what your opponent needs to do to solve the adventure. They can do this at any time during their turn after they have drawn their first card, but unless stated, they will have to do it all at once. The opponent's reward section describes what the reward is for your opponent solving the adventure. When an opponent solves your adventure, they get the effects of the reward, and then the adventure card goes to your discard pile. Remember that adventures don't have a power cost to play them, and instead you need to spend 2 actions during your action step to put an adventure into play. Keep in mind also that each player may only have one adventure in play at a time, and they cannot play another one until the current one is discarded. As mentioned before, you begin the game with a starting character in play, and that character's ability is active right away. However, you can also put other character cards into your deck and play them from your hand. Character cards, like adventures, do not have a power cost on them, but instead require 2 actions to play. Like other sideways cards, they remain in play after playing, and any abilities on them become available right away. Like item cards, some character cards may provide power. These work the same way they do on item cards. Like previously stated, your starting character cannot be discarded for any reason. However, character cards you play from your hand can be discarded by cards' effects. After you are done with your action step, you move on to the 5th step, end of your turn. If any cards have effects that trigger during this step, they happen now. After a player's 5th step, their turn is over, and the next player's turn begins with the 5 steps of their turn. And then it goes back to the next player starting with the 1st step again. The game then continues back and forth between players until one player's deck runs out of cards. And if it does, they lose the game and their opponent is victorious. Some non-lesson cards have keywords that are listed on the type line following the card's type. Certain cards may refer to these keywords in their text. For example, Bruisewort Balm reads, shuffle up to 5 non-healing cards from your discard pile into your deck. This means the 5 cards from your discard pile that you are shuffling in cannot contain the healing keyword in their type line. One important keyword to note is unique. It is found most frequently on character cards, but can be found on other types of cards as well. The unique keyword means that only one of that card can be in play at a time. The only exception is if you and your opponent have the same starting character. Otherwise, once a unique card is in play, nobody else can play another copy of that same card, or a card that represents the same person in the case of a unique character. Regular deck building in the HP TCG follows a few simple rules. Firstly, your deck must have exactly 60 cards, and one additional card that is your starting character. The only rule with starting characters is that they must have the wizard or witch keyword. Secondly, your deck can have at most 4 copies of any card, with the exception of lesson cards, which you can include any number of. Beyond these rules, the rest of deck building is up to the strategy that you wish to pursue. Remember that you should generally include a decent amount of lessons to be able to play your other cards. For most decks, around 20 is a fair starting number, and as you play your games, you can either add more lessons if you aren't getting as many lessons as you need to play your other cards, or take lessons out if you are drawing more lessons than you need. Depending on what type of format you are playing, there may be additional rules to follow, like a list of banned cards that may not be included or the possibility to use a sideboard. If playing in a tournament, as with all specifics, refer to your tournament organizer for details. You should now be able to play a regular game of the Harry Potter trading card game. Linked in the description are additional resources that should answer any further questions that you may have. Thanks for watching.